house in Baltimore. Best part of Toronto is you give them $1 and they give you like $1.40 back. That's a nice exchange rate. I got a guy here who knows a little bit about exchange rates. He gets around a little bit, doing all things the business of sports. As a sports professor at Georgetown University, he is our defending champion, always undefeated when class is in session around here. Longtime executive with the Baltimore Orioles as well as the Texas Rangers. And I saw him on an Easter Sunday in Atlanta where his beautiful daughter works for the Atlanta Falcons and is still in the recovery mode as everybody, I think, in the Falcons organization. But Marty Conway got a good look at the all-new SunTrust Bank Thing Park in the suburbs down in Atlanta. Marty, you enjoyed a little baseball down there with Chief Nakahoma and Winalata and all that good stuff in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, well, I wanted to see, in my quest to get to all these stadiums after being involved in the first couple of kind of that opened in this tradition, to try to see them. So whenever I'm, nearby, I make that happen. So today, was they're still playing the Padres, and I was able to get in there. So interesting, though, that on their third game of the season in a brand new stadium, they didn't sell out. So
on a Sunday. Now on an Easter, right? I mean, so there's a holiday involved here where you get involved with traditions and whatnot. But, that ballpark, I saw the night it opened in the exhibition. They played the Yankees. It looked like they were trying to sell like you guys did in 1992, 2/3 of the seats or whatever. And they showed all the little sexy things like out in right field. They actually have holes in the tabletop that are refrigerated to keep your beer cold during the game, which I think is, we put a man on the moon in 1969, Marty. What the hell took 50 years to figure this out, to keep your beer cold at the ballpark? But it really did look like it sort of dropped Turner Field down out in the suburbs. I mean, it didn't physically look all that much different on television. Now, I hear inside it's a lot different, obviously. It's amenitied out the wazoo, right?
Well, yeah, I can tell you. So on that exhibition night when they played the Yankees a couple of weeks ago, they actually only opened that to season ticket holders. So they have 20-some thousand season ticket holders allegedly. So the ballpark was about half full, but it was a night just reserved for season ticket holders. And that's the way they decided to sort of soft open the place. But the first weekend was actually, this Easter weekend when they were playing the Padres, and if you can name any more than two players on the Padres, I'll buy you dinner, because most people can't. But yeah, when you say ballpark, this is way, way more than a ballpark. This project here is a mixed-use development between some retail, some residential, some office complexes. It's, the ballpark is just one part of it. There's about $600 million worth of development. So to put this in perspective to put this in your mind's eye in Baltimore, imagine Oriole Park at Camden Yards being the ballpark, and then every piece of land from outside the ballpark to the other end of M&T Stadium basically being some sort of retail, restaurant, food-oriented place. Like I said, 4 or 5-story apartments, 10, 12-floor office building. Comcast is moving regional headquarters in there. So it's that kind of development. It's way more than a ballpark, and it's essentially the at the other end of the continuum, if you will, of when Camden Yards opened in 1992, which was essentially building a ballpark on, 15, 18, 20 acres total, whatever it is, to now taking that to maybe 40, 50, 60 acres and adding a complete entertainment complex. It's not the first to do it. It's already happened in St. Louis with what's called Cardinal Village. It's happened in Atlanta. It's going to happen in Texas at Arlington, where the Rangers are going to build another new ballpark 25 years after the other one that I helped did open, because they need more. They claim they need more retail and entertainment experiences around it. So it's the Jerry Jonesification of baseball. Nothing is quite big enough. Nothing is large enough. Nothing is spectacular enough. It's just really one has to really outdo the other. And what they've done here, it's quite controversial, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it's setting another direction, if you will, for facility development in sports, which is grown beyond just playing the games.
Marty Conway joins us here, and he is uniquely qualified to discuss this because Marty was in the meetings at the dawn of Camden Yards and where Camden Yards was going to go. You know, John Stedman talked about Port Covington. You know, Schaefer was dead set against anything that didn't involve that warehouse. There was questions about what it would do to the baseball and what it would do to home runs and what it would do to the community and were they building it in the right spot and how would the light rail impact it and transportation and would Washingtonians and people from Northern Virginia get there and how would those freeways and 395 dump into the parking lot and what would happen if they ever had a football team. Those were the decisions 30 years ago, Marty, you were working with. But when I go through and I went to all 30 of these ballparks, I'm now short a ballpark because of this new Atlanta ballpark, so I have to get down there at some point. But all of the rest of these, this is really more like the New England project that involved a mall, restaurants, a bowling alley, a movie theater, but New England's out in the middle of a pasture. There really isn't a city popping up there or anything other than a mall and a stadium, kind of sort of in a parking lot, for people to go to and shop a little bit. The Atlanta thing is steroidal. Now, I know Washington sort of wanted to build it into that half-street thing there. San Diego built Petco Park, and really this whole sort of Soho, Chelsea, Greenwich Village, New York thing has popped up around the stadium there. I know at Camden Yards they sort of wanted that to happen, but it never really happened, and maybe the hotel in front is part of that. But, there aren't a whole lot of more places where they're going to be able to do this model, Marty. I mean, it's nice. It sounds great, but maybe Tampa, maybe Oakland, kind of, sort of. Maybe if Anaheim ever moves somewhere else, maybe. But they're kind of like out of ballparks, right, for the most part.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So let's unpack it a little bit at a time. So what happened in Atlanta here was in 2013, November 2013, and very much a surprise move, the Braves announced that they had struck a deal with Cobb County, which is one of the suburban counties, a very wealthy suburban county here north of basically Atlanta proper. So again, in your mind's eye for listeners in the Baltimore area, think about it being almost northern Baltimore County, maybe even Harford County, in terms of how far it is outside the city.
So this is moving
of
the Orioles to somewhere between White Marsh and Bel Air, let's say, or somewhere so between Owings Mills and maybe Hampstead, say, kind of sort of.
Yeah, the best example I could give you is if you were to envision the 695 Beltway and the 95 interchange up there north of the city. Imagine that up in that northeast quadrant where 695 and 95 come together, and you have all this different traffic and all these different loops, a ballpark sitting up in the upper right-hand corner, right? Because literally, when you drive 75 and 285 in Atlanta, you can see SunTrust Park right from there. So that's literally where the ballpark would be, and that would be moving it out of the city, plunking it down there. So
it's almost more like a Capital Center, like FedEx, where it sits on a freeway, but not in the city anymore. And your whole era was moving these teams into where people were, right, or into the city, right?
Yeah. So in the controversy here, the Cobb County did this in a very kind of behind closed doors way. There was no public referendum. There wasn't any really public discussion. The commissioner of Cobb County was able to do that, and his rationale for doing it that way was he said, "Look, this is no different than luring a corporation to move from Texas to Atlanta or whatever. The public isn't really involved in that." So essentially, he was able to generate $400 million worth of bonding that was supported by revenue from a hotel tax, rent-a-car tax. Everybody does this the same way now because the rationale is, people in town don't rent hotels and people in town don't rent rent-a-cars. Those are the visitors, so we'll tax them, right? That's the idea. So the controversy here in Atlanta area was that there was never any real public debate about it. They had one or two hearings. The only people that supported it were allowed to sign up for it. The commissioner didn't allow any other speaking slots. So fast forward to last year, 2016, he was actually voted out of office because of this. So he was able to get the deal done for the Braves, but it cost him his political future. So it landed there. And just as I said, it's the ballpark, and then it's this mixed-use development. The reason why that's so important now for ownership, the cost of these franchises is so high now that revenue that would come from the development around obviously isn't shareable because it doesn't belong to the ball club itself. So while television deals and stadium concessions and ticketing revenue are all shareable to MLB, things like this, things like private development that are part of the ownership are not. Those proceeds stay within the ownership group itself. So that was really their rationale for getting out of Atlanta. The other thing you mentioned, Washington, Atlanta, the idea was that these stadiums would move into these locations in downtown, and then the retail and neighborhoods would build up around it. But what they found was that was uneven because you had recessionary times or you've had the lack of development. So ownership got frustrated in many places with the lack of pace of development. So actually the ballpark moving into Atlanta, where the old Olympic Stadium was, 20 years later, that area really hadn't developed satisfactorily. So anyhow, the Braves thought that they pretty much had run out of time and struck their own deal, and yes, they moved. So the other thing about it is there is no public transportation to and from the stadium. It's all parking lots. It's literally right off the interstate. It's an interesting new experiment of going in the opposite direction, if you will, for stadium development, which is instead of going downtown into existing infrastructure and road systems and retail, it's moving it out here and taking all the retail with you. So look, it's a little bit like having a ballpark in the Mall of Dubai, right? You have all these other things around it, and you have this ballpark sitting in the middle of it. It works here because there's not a great tradition in the Atlanta area they've had pretty good baseball teams, and the Braves were in Boston and then Milwaukee and then Atlanta. But in terms of a Fenway Park, a Camden Yards or Wrigley Field, that's not the type of approach that goes on sort of in the Southeast. You'll have people from Alabama, South Carolina, North Florida coming here for weekends because this is Major League Baseball for them in the area.
Did you enjoy it? I mean, did you like the ballpark, Marty?
Yeah, well, the ballpark itself, once you get inside, it does. It has all the amenities. It looks great. It has all the, great sight lines and all the great internet access and all that. But what you find is getting in and out of it is really an interesting new, we probably walked from our parking lot that we paid, $16 or $18 to park. We probably walked a half to 3/4 of a mile over a pedestrian bridge over the main highway. So the access and the egress is going to be interesting. Now, look, it's the first year. It's the first weekend. There's a lot that still has to be built, I'm sure, to get around that. And I would bet that the traffic plan and parking plans will be revised.
But is the neighborhood open? Do people already live there? Or is there are the coffee shops open and restaurants? I mean, in the outside area, is it still like a shell?
No, well, so within a mile, you might find some of the existing places. And I'm talking about kind of hotels and motels and things like that. All of what you describe of like a coffee shop, whatever, that's still a couple miles away in terms of its reach from there. You can see it, but you really can't walk to it. So imagine, again, it's like coming into M&T Stadium from the south, and people, open their existing businesses to allow cars to park for $15 or $20 or $30, whatever it is, to supplement the existing parking that they have. So it is unique in the fact that it's already built to an existing neighborhood, but there wasn't much there in this particular plot of land. It was sort of waiting for development, and the stadium was good. So the neighbors, what I've talked to people down here, the residents, the neighbors, they're apprehensive about it. They're apprehensive primarily because of the traffic. They do appreciate the revenue that's going to come from it. But like everybody else, no one wants traffic in a stadium in their front or backyard, and that's what they're mostly concerned about. Now, again, 1 or 2 years from now, when they build some more pedestrian bridges and they access this, it'll probably work itself out. It'll be an interesting experiment. But look, they made the decision at the same year that the Falcons are opening a new stadium downtown in the existing mass transit area and are going to have a Super Bowl and an NCAA championship and a college football championship. The Braves went the other direction and allegedly moved closer to their season ticket holders. That's the overall rationale for it. So it's good. It's just different. I wouldn't rank it that high in terms of a baseball experience, but it is what it is for this area, and most of the people here seem to enjoy it. They haven't been exposed, I don't think, to the 25 or 26 other ballpark experiences. They're up there now.
Well, and then they got to go win some games here as well. Marty Conway's down in Atlanta. He, of course, is our sports business professor for Georgetown, as well as the longtime Major League Baseball executive with the Orioles, as well as the Rangers. For the local area this week, I have spent a lot of time at Verizon Center, and I don't mean the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Between the Caps and the Wizards playing. For Ted, for the franchise, for his CSN foray, as well as his monumental brand. We got the Brigade and the Valor playing now, trying to play some indoor football. But it's a busy, busy time for Ted Leonsis as a local owner, and a really weird thing where the Capitals lose this overtime game the other night, the Wizards win. But it's so different for the basketball than it is for the hockey. They are two completely different fan bases at this point. And the Wizards games are almost sleepy even during the playoffs compared to the way the fervor for the hockey team.
Yeah, well, there has not been a consistency or a drumbeat for playoff basketball. The Wizards have experienced a playoff here and there, and the last couple of years ago, but the Caps have been in the playoffs every year, and even though they've had their fits and starts with how far they get, but the fan base has built up sort of and been accustomed to that. The Wizards fan base is just learning this whole process of what does it mean to be a 4th seed or a 3 seed or a 2 seed. They've been accustomed to being kind of, if they get in the playoffs, they get in as a 7 or 8 seed, and maybe they last a round. A couple of years ago, they got to another round. So that's going to take some time. But you're right. The demographic for sure, of the Wizards is way different than the demographic for hockey, as you might imagine. And that creates a whole different dynamic to going to the events down there.
It feels like a different building, from midnight on Saturday night to 1 o'clock on Sunday.
Yeah.
It's just the energy's different, and I don't know what the Wizards, I guess what I'm saying is, what can the Wizards do beyond what they've done, which is win a lot of basketball games, right? That's what they've done, including Game 1, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. And so the Scott Brooks era, what they can do is they can win consistently and develop that sort of sense of, well, the regular season is really just a precursor to the playoffs, and it's kind of a drum beat, if you will, that gets louder towards the playoffs. But I have to say that, if the Wizards can position themselves to be that, basketball has a real natural attraction in the Baltimore, Washington, Northern Virginia area. A lot of great players, the Kevin Durant's of the world and others that have come through and come out of that area. There is a basketball pedigree in D.C., but it needs to be fed consistently every year, and this may be the combination to do it, but it definitely draws a different crowd. It definitely has a different vibe, for good or bad, whatever it is. But it's sort of like difference between weighing something that's 10 pounds and weighing something that's 5 pounds. And that's sort of where the Wizards are at this moment. But the way the NBA is marketed, ultimately I think it could be as or even more successful than the Capitals, just because the nature of the teams, the Golden States, the Clevelands, and people that know that. I mean, people that come to Capitals games, they know the Capitals. They don't know necessarily a whole lot about the other team other than Pittsburgh and a couple other rivalries, whereas in the NBA, you're bringing in named players 7 out of every 10 times that come in. So it's a completely different marketing approach. But look, it's good for business at the moment for Ted to have 2 teams in that playoff with the potential, at least, for each of them to go 1 or 2 or more rounds into the playoffs, which he hasn't had that sort of experience very often in the last 10, 12, 15 years.
Last but never least, anything to say on the Orioles, from where they are? I mean, obviously, this is the kind of start you want to have, right? I mean, as we talk right now, they are the best team in baseball. They're out on the road. They've played well enough, right? I mean, they certainly the exact opposite of what we've seen in Toronto, where, I'm going to be in Toronto the next couple of days. They're 2-10, and it looks like the season's gone down the tubes before it even gets started. Yeah,
well, getting off to a start in baseball, even though there's, twice as many games in the NFL and, 10 times as many games than the NBA and 10 times as many games as, say, in the NFL, it still matters. The opening weekend, the opening day draws so much media attention that how well you do and kind of how exciting those games are. When we were doing business with our television partners in Baltimore, their one ask every year, and it was consistent, was just, please get off to a good start. Because even though we've booked a lot of business, and I'm sure the Orioles corporately and season ticket-wise have booked a fair amount of business, there's nothing like that first week or two of being successful and pushing people over the edge into committing to a ticket plan or committing to corporate sponsorship or committing to advertising on your media. It can make the difference. It's not to say that people will or won't do it, but if they're sitting on the fence, they may have a tendency to go ahead and make that commitment based on that. So getting off to a good start in baseball, it doesn't mean anything because the last 60 games can be just as important or more important than the first 60. But from a business standpoint, it sort of tips the scales in your favor, and you like to have that if you can, especially when you're in the sales cycle, which is where, all these teams are at the moment. So that means you can book more giveaways, you can book some more fireworks events, you can do some other things like that with a little bit of this momentum that you have behind you.
He is Marty Conway. You can follow his journey, Marty Conway, out on LinkedIn as well as on Twitter. Class is, your class is always in session for you, right? I mean, you spend Easter Sunday with your daughter down at the Braves game, but you're always working.
you're walking around trying to determine who paid what for this and what's this process. And again, it's all relative to the experiences that we have. And look, I go all the way back to 1989 when they opened Skydome in Toronto and they had a hotel in center field, and people thought that was the most innovative thing that there was. So when people talk about the Battery here in Atlanta and the relationship and the how innovative it is to do that, I say, hold on a second. You got to go all the way back to Toronto in 1989. You got to look at Joe Robbie Stadium when it opened with club seating. Nobody had ever thought of club seating before that. So then came Camden Yards, and then came Cleveland and Denver and all these other ones that happened. So this is just a manifestation of, this 25-year journey in stadium development. So you said yes earlier. It's likely to pause here for a little while because just about everybody that can have a stadium, it has one. And now the next question will be, where does the next leg of sports development go? I mean, we'll see.
He is Marty Conway, out on LinkedIn as well as on Twitter. We are always blessed to have him on, the good professor from Georgetown University and, of course, sports business. So class was closed. Some say I have no class. We'll find out north of the border. I'm going to be in Toronto all week, attending hockey class, as well as the Raptors being in town, as well as the Blue Jays being in town. So there'll be Geddy Lee, hopefully, will be in town. Maybe show up for a baseball game before it's all over with. I'll be up there stalking Rush, doing a little hockey conversation, and hopefully checking in with y'all on social media. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, anywhere the internet is served, we are there, as well as in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault. NFL schedule, we're expecting that out on Thursday. Trips to London, Green Bay, Nashville, Minnesota, Oakland. We'll have it all ready for you out on the website as well, and you can email me on that as well. I think that's it. Any breaking news happens first on the WNST text service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be here on Thursday driving you home from 3 until 5. I'll be getting back for the weekend for Game 5 on Friday night down at the Verizon Center. A lot of hockey, a lot of baseball in Cincinnati this week, getting ready for the draft and watching the Wizards. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.